It's been 50 years since the Watergate break-in, the scandal that brought down the Nixon presidency.
On June 17, 1972, several burglars were arrested in the Democratic National Committee office. It's located in the Watergate complex west of the U.S. Capitol and the White House. The burglars were connected to then-President Nixon's re-election campaign.
They were caught wiretapping phones and stealing documents. Nixon tried to cover up the crimes, but two reporters with the Washington Post revealed his role in the conspiracy. A House committee panel began the process to impeach Nixon, but he resigned before they could reach a verdict. The Frost-Nixon interviews were as close as the U.S. came to having a verdict in the impeachment. 57 million Americans tuned in to watch the interview, the longest audience ever for a public affairs program.
Joining us now is journalist, author, and playwright James Reston Jr. He worked on research into Richard Nixon and Watergate with David Frost leading up to those 1977 televised Frost and Nixon interviews. And that led up, as we just mentioned, to the closest thing the world would get in terms of a confession. First, James, good morning and thanks for joining us.
Good morning to you all.
I want to ask, you are no stranger to the North Carolina area, 14 years at UNC, first as a student and then as a professor, but there would be something that drew you away from Chapel Hill in 73 and 74 to watch the demise of Richard Nixon. What was it that drew you to want to leave and go to D.C. to watch?
Well, we're celebrating today just the break-in itself, and what succeeded that was about 8 months as the Watergate scandal unfolded. And as it unfolded, as I was sitting in my country place outside of Chapel Hill, I just thought, this is going to be the greatest political scandal that I'll ever witness in my life. And of course, we're witnessing one now that is certainly equivalent. And I really wanted to be there. So I took leave of absence and was in Washington 73 to 74 to watch this incredible drama unfold.
Well, you watched the drama unfold, but you also kept a very detailed diary of the proceedings of the days. When you go back and read that, how thankful are you that you had the foresight to document everything that you saw firsthand?
It wasn't so much foresight, I don't think, as just an appreciation that this was an extraordinary historical moment. And I had come to witness it, and every day was interesting. I was going between the various legal court battles and the House Judiciary Committee things and talking to people along the way. I knew it was immensely historic, and I thought I would want to remember it.
I want to ask you, during those Frost-Nixon interviews, you were in the room there, close to the room, when Nixon gave the closest thing to a confession that we would see there. What was that moment like for you? Because obviously not a lot of pity for that man, but was there a sense of victory kind of laced with a little bit of pity for the man really making confession in front of all of America?
Well, what those 57 million people saw was 90 minutes of programming, but actually the Watergate interrogation of Nixon happened over a 24-hour period, over a two-day period, so it was very much compressed. We had decided on a facts and dates interrogation of Nixon, just a relentless going over the evidence of the tapes, and it was really pressing Nixon. And somebody from Nixon's camp came onto the set and asked for a pause. There was a 10-minute pause in which they argued for Frost to back off, and no agreement was made. But when he came back on the set, Frost changed his tone and was really kind of a father confessor. And out of that came first Nixon's acknowledgement of his criminality, which was an extraordinary historical achievement in itself. And then an apology to the nation, which the nation has never seen anything like it. So it deserves to live certainly in broadcast history and also in American history, I think.
How did the Watergate scandal put the spotlight on journalism and the media's role, especially investigative journalism, when it comes to politics and keeping government officials, holding them accountable?
Well, I've always thought in retrospect that the fact that David Frost was English and that he was an entertainer, and also because he had a reputation of being something of a softball, that's why Nixon agreed to be interviewed by him. But David Frost knew when to push very hard and when to back off. And I think if it had been one of those gotcha American journalists, excuse me, Julian, that it would have been a kind of a straight line. But by having a sense of drama and having a sense of where the emotions were going in that interview, he was the very best person in the world to do it.
I do want to ask, because you've drawn parallels, you've written op-eds about it, in terms of the parallels with what we're seeing now with Donald Trump and parallels with Nixon. I do want to ask, those tapes for Nixon kind of was a moment where his base turned against him. He lost that base. Do you believe there's anything that we could see during these January 6 hearings that could turn Donald Trump's base, the MAGA base, against him?
Well, the most important thing that lives in the Watergate matter is the House Judiciary Committee report on the overall situation. And of course, the tapes were just to die for evidence that actually put you inside the White House as this conspiracy was unfolding. So what we're seeing today is kind of an equivalent of finally, at long last, going inside the White House on that afternoon. That's what's really important of the last couple of days. Remember, we've been months thinking that the only thing we were going to get inside the White House was this Kevin McCarthy phone call with Trump. Now we have this very rich portrait of what was happening inside the White House unfolding. It's an extraordinary thing. But like the Judiciary Committee report on Nixon, what ultimately, from the historic standpoint, is going to be important is the final report, where all of these events are brought together and distilled for future generations, because this is a very, very important historic moment we're living through.
Will this moment, the January 6th riots, be looked at and viewed in the same scope as being the dark chapter that the Watergate scandal was?
Yes, absolutely. I was not all that keen about the way in which this thing was organized at the beginning by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. I thought it was probably going to be easily dismissed as a result. I've certainly changed my mind about that, and I'm really quite admiring of how the depth at which they're going into this thing. Remember, this is not about politics. This is about criminality now. And what we're getting is the evidence of criminality. Ultimately, that all needs to be brought together for history.
One of the things you mentioned in your op-eds, and I do want to ask you about it, is the difference between having a committee and an independent commission. You had recommended that it be George Bush and Al Gore that had an independent commission. Do you think that we would be getting different results if we had a commission instead of the committee that we have?
Well, it depends on who the commissioners were to be chosen in that whole thing. I was talking about what the ideal commission would be, and was thinking about the 9/11 commission, which is kind of the golden standard of commissions that is impaneled after a horrendous event in American history. Too bad it didn't go in that direction. Very good on them that it didn't have Republicans on the panel that were just troublemakers. So what's going on at the moment is a very, very serious gathering of criminal evidence and an account of really a kind of medieval attack on our temple. I've written 4 books about medieval history, and the attack on the U.S. Capitol very much invokes for me, the notion of of barbarians at the gate.
Well, it seems like the landscape of American politics right now is so polarizing. People have opinions about what's playing out during these hearings. How does this all end?
Well, I think it ends with it all being brought together in a report that will last forever. Whether people are persuaded by this or whether they are persuadable. I mean, I think part of the division we're talking about here is that people who are in favor of Donald Trump are not listening, are not persuadable. They're not being rational about the deep criminality of this entire event. So that is what it is, and it's where we are in American culture at the moment.
Well, James Reston Jr., thank you for taking the time. We could talk about this for hours on end, but if you want more from James Reston, you can go ahead and look at his books, his op-eds. There's plenty of stuff to find, his literature, of stuff he's written about Nixon, about the January 6th committee. But again, James Reston Jr., thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
Delighted to do it.
Thank you.